want him out alive.
Question. You connected a particular historical event with the zeitgeist of police and race relations today. What did you learn about the 1970s divide between police and citizens of color that we can apply to 2022?
It feels like we're endlessly relitigating the same stuff. It's the 60s and 70s all over again. And it was shocking to me as I made this film, as Michael Brown was being killed and Breonna Taylor and Elijah McClain and George Floyd and this horrible litany of people. It was shocking to find out that there's been a solution since 1973 when Dr. Harvey Schlossberg invented hostage negotiation. And I was just hoping that I could make a film exciting and dramatic and enough of a thriller to actually get people to watch and learn about some of these tactics that can be so helpful in our lives and in our communities.
What was the perfect storm in the Brooklyn incident depicted in the film that led to negotiation rather than shootings? And how did the ripple effect of that success start to affect police forces going forward?
Yeah, I mean, for 130 years, the police MO was to deliver an ultimatum, which we now know often just calcifies the resentment and fear and terror and leads directly to violence. It hasn't worked in places like Waco. That was their MO. If you do that, and then you go in guns blazing. But in this incident in 1973 at John and Al's Sporting Goods, there were 12 women and children hostages of all races, all colors. And if Harvey tried to tell the cops and the brass, if you even throw in tear gas, it can set off this ammunition inside the store and blow up an entire city block. We could have a massacre on our hands. So they just were leery of going in. It gave Harvey, who was trained as a psychologist, a chance to test out his theories that if you talk, if you use deep empathy, and you don't try to win the situation, which is always the American way, but you go in and you listen, and maybe you have a chance of getting out alive.
The players involved in the incident are now old men. What surprised you about their retrospective, given that they haven't talked about or thought about the incident maybe in years?
I was shocked by so many things as I researched the story. I went upstate to Attica trying to track down these, quote, cop killers, and only to find out they probably didn't even really do it. We're not sure, but it looks like it could have been friendly fire. But, on all sides, I wanted to talk to everyone who was there, not just the cops, but the hostages and the gunmen. And they had radically different views of what happened. I was surprised talking to the cops by how much pain, grief, and unacknowledged trauma that they carry every day. And for decades, the only therapist on the NYPD was a guy by the name of Jack Daniels. It's only now they're even offered any therapy and help, and they often don't use it because it goes against that hero image, the man code that we have as American men, where we can never show vulnerability, we can never admit emotions, we have to dominate every interaction, and we're judged on our ability to take abuse. I mean, when we talk about a good football player, it's always, yeah, he can really take some punishment. That's what we're taught, and it's toxic for these cops. And it often, as you hear in the film, it leads directly to violence. They say, first you grieve for your buddy, then you want to go out and bust some heads.
In association with that, one of the more powerful statements in the film was about the machoism of policing and men with guns, rooted not in reality, but in our media culture vis-a-vis Hollywood movies and today's cop shows. How has that culture damaged the conversation, and what responsibility do the creators of these films and TV shows owe us in their depiction?
I really love that question, and we see these incidents like Will Smith and Chris Rock. What do you think Will Smith is going to see violence as doing but creating a redemptive arc for him and making him look like a hero and coming in and dominating? He's played that role a million times in these Hollywood films. We were all raised on it. It's American culture that we inherit from Ireland and Scotland and these violent patriarchal societies that America comes from. It was further, intensified by slavery and by the need for white people to dominate. And it's just so exciting on screen to see violence. So if you want a movie to be exciting, throw a gun in there. So we all have a responsibility as filmmakers to critique that a little bit, to show other ways. There's a question here: can I make this film great without a violent ending? And so that was my challenge as a filmmaker. I had to kind of work harder to show the tension and the anxiety and the fear, and really make a thriller that ended with this salvation, everyone getting out alive, and this uplifting quality that comes out of this tragedy. But it's harder for us as men to think that way. We think it makes us look weak. We think, films will be boring. So it's a challenge that American men have to start answering in our lives, in our art, and the way we raise our sons.
You were working with limited footage of the news sources of the era. How did you unearth the archives, and what was a key find to illustrate the atmosphere and events that occurred nearly 50 years ago?
I'm a huge fan of Dog Day Afternoon and French Connection and these great films. And when I first heard about the story, I'm like, oh my God, this is like the lost 70s Sidney Lumet film. So I spent hours poring over like scraps of film, trying to find like little video clips that are super low res. And then we got them all blown up to 4K where the grain's popping. And it's a painstaking process, but I just felt like we could tell this 70s gritty multicultural story in a 2020 way, that we could hear from all sides. And in French Connection, in that scene where Gene Hackman's roughing up people of color in that bar, that was across the street from the sporting goods store in my film, and you see that exterior in my film. But in that film, we didn't hear from those Black people about what it feels like to be in these one-sided dominant interactions, which create resentment and fuel the anger and violence on our streets. It's been seen with research time and time again. The way police interact with youth fuels violence. So cops love this film. They're using it in training new hostage negotiators. And we wanted to tell that time-tested story of cops and violence in a whole new way and put a new lens on that.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2022.